Beautiful in and out. Someone who is smart, who is intelligent. So I want like the total package.
The No Ordinary Love Podcast with Rosalind Ona. Every relationship is unique, has its own rhythm and melody. What worked for them may not necessarily work for you. Welcome to the No Ordinary Love Podcast. We're so excited. I'm so excited. I'm excited for today's topic. I'm excited for today's speaker. This is going to be a really good one. We have Monica Landry. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and her specialty is sex. So we're going to have a great conversation about human sexuality today. But I'm going to let you introduce yourself, Monica. So please tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been a therapist for almost 10 years. I originally started out working with teens anywhere from age 4 to 17, 18. And then I worked with couples and individuals, families. But some fun information about me is I actually worked at a radio station before and wrote a few commercials because I have a degree in advertising.
Wow, that's so cool. Like, what led your interest into advertising, and how'd you get from advertising to licensed marriage and family therapist?
Yeah, it's a jump for sure. I'm pretty sure I had like at least 4 or 5 options or picks for like majors in college, and I landed on advertising because it's the words. I used to love write copy, and it was just so fun. And so my first job out of college with an advertising degree was the radio station, which I loved and was fun, but I was mainly just selling air. And so that it just didn't pan out. I felt like I was just always going to sell. So I took some time off and I was a nanny for a little bit because I've always loved working with kids. And I went through a big self-exploration phase. I was reading a lot of self-help books, trying to figure out like, what is my path? Because this isn't it. I'm just not hitting it. And so I read this book that said, go into a bookstore and see which like heading like entices you or gets you really excited. And I always found myself in the like sexuality, self-improvement, growth area. And for some reason, something about it just enticed me. And so I started to look into different degrees. And I stumbled upon an LMFT, which I never heard of before. I didn't even know that was a thing. I thought everybody was just a therapist or a social worker. And this was a particular area where I could eventually be a sex therapist. So I went for the degree and now I'm here. 10 years, almost 10 years later. It's kind of crazy.
The interesting thing is I feel it's kind of full circle because you're using your kind of like radio background and you're melding that with your LMFT right here, right now. So everything is always, it kind of always works itself out.
Yeah. I appreciate you asking me to be here because then that just brings it all together. Thank you.
You're very welcome. So definitely as a licensed marriage and family therapist focusing on sexuality, what are some of the kind of things you're seeing? What are some of the kind of broad themes in this area of the kind of clients that you have? What are people talking about right now in your view?
Wow, that's a good question. I have a lot of couples that tend to come, not every couple, most couples will say, when you ask them, what's bringing you here? What do you want to work on or improve? They always say communication. Mm-hmm. And it's usually, it's communication on the surface, but it tends to be a disconnect somewhere, or we didn't repair a fight, or things have just gotten so distant between us that we can't seem to find our way back to each other. I'll either kind of get that scenario with couples, or I'll get women that are talking about like lack of desire or not knowing themselves in general or sexually.
Mm-hmm. I was just curious about, you said communication. Is it when they say they're having a kind of sexual problem in their relationship, they bring that down to communication? Or when people are talking about their sexuality, what are the challenges in that aspect?
I have a few couples that will say, well, communication is the loud thing. That's the thing that they initially say is the problem. But then when you start to dig a little deeper, which you have to, it's just like this, like you're digging a little deeper into this.
Yeah.
I have to dig a little deeper into like, what does that mean? You don't have good communication, you think? How does that transcend over into the bedroom and your intimate connection with one another? If you're not able to communicate about who's going to do what in the household, what does your sex life look like? And so like I try to dig a little deeper into that and really understand, because it just kind of, that's the quickest way to get to know what's your sex life like. And they'll tell you everything, right? And they'll be like, communication is completely horrible.
Got it. So kind of communication is the door that opens you up into kind of what is into their sexual issues and sexual challenges.
Yeah, that's a better way of saying it.
So now that we know a little bit about you, a little bit about your background, we will kind of move into what is the segment of our program that we like to call the Relationship Rundown, where we explore current trends and topics and kind of get your view on it. I'll share my view a little bit on it. Feel free to ask any questions of me that you may have, and we'll just see what kind of conversation we have. So, Steven, our producer, if you could play the first video.
Emotionally damaged people are always sexually promiscuous. Let me say this again. If you are traumatized, if you are emotionally damaged, you are promiscuous. And do you want to know why?
Why is that?
Emotionally traumatized people require constant validation from others. You married to a woman who's been traumatized, abuse, abandonment, whatever. When you're not around her for too many days, she has to entertain another man because her trauma dictates constant validation. And constant validation means I must have a man in my personal space. You ever date a woman who was crazy about you? She absolutely loved you, so you thought. It was really addiction.
Yeah.
When you finally let her go, when you finally got her to stop stalking you, she ended up with another man like that. And your ego took a hit. You said, wait a minute. I know that woman was crazy about me. Climbed in my window, came to my... You understand? She was... She was crazy about your presence in her life. And the minute you distance yourself from her life, she found a replacement without a problem. Emotionally damaged people are promiscuous because they cannot go without constant validation.
They need that validation.
They need it. Most of our promiscuous women are damaged women. They're not having sex because they love having sex. They're having sex because they have learned this is the only way I can get a man's attention.
First off,
Dr. Umar is definitely a character. I'll start off by sharing, I think he said always, which I think nobody always does anything. That's like the therapy 101.
That's the golden rule. Yeah, you got it. You know it. Exactly.
I would also say I think that there are a host of reasons to dig a little deeper into that. There are a host of reasons that someone may be promiscuous, whether male or female. You could have had a neglect in your childhood. That could be a reason why you're seeking validation external to you. So that could also be another reason leading to promiscuity. And I think it's also a challenge to say that some promiscuity to connote it as positive or negative, right? Some people may just be in a phase of exploring their sexuality, and that may be how they're choosing to explore it. And others may also maybe enjoy sex and are being labeled as promiscuous. So those were kind of like my initial kind of observations about that. But I'm curious what you think about the video.
My first response is like, does it rub? Is it me? It just rubs me the wrong way. I'm like, oh, like I feel like a Brillo pad is being rubbed against my skin when he starts, like, just his initial headline. If you just go off of that, it's like I could pinpoint so many things wrong with it from a therapist's perspective. Yeah. A few things stand out to me. Yeah, you're right. The always, that's not necessarily true. There's a lot of outliers, right? Always and never are the things you're not supposed to say. They don't really happen. But it's such a spectrum. And I think I'm fortunate enough, like I get to see people on so many different levels of trauma or abuse or neglect or abandonment. It's such a spectrum, and it's hard to really throw that out there and just like, that's it. I think it's very like kind of like a little black and white.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah. There are like so many different ways in which someone could present that could lead them to being sexually promiscuous, right? So to label someone in that way, I think is really dangerous, like we said. But does it present for women differently than it would present for men? Would that be something you have seen?
Sexual promiscuity?
Yeah, the reasons for sexual promiscuity.
Yes and no. It really does depend on the individual. It's so hard to pin down. I'm going to give you a whole bunch of gray answers because that's truly where I hang out all the time, is in this gray space where nothing is absolute and everybody has a different truth. And I can always understand all the different perspectives that people show up with. Like, it's traumatizing sometimes when you're a firstborn and you have a sibling. That's traumatizing because you're not the center of attention anymore. Everybody has a certain level of abandonment when you start to get into like attachment styles and attachment issues. Like, you could easily have a ton of abandonment from a parent that just wasn't present or that didn't show up to your support, to your games and to events you were a part of. And that could lead to something, or, more intense stuff that I think he's referencing more is like that really, higher intensity and trauma that does pop up. Absolutely. And I think on one side that can happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely.
And you bring up a really good point about it could be a space of self-exploration. Like, if this is all I know, then what, and that was in my environment growing up, how am I going to show up in the world? What am I going to do?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
So what if it isn't sexual exploration and it is really promiscuity, and this is something someone has decided that they're showing up this way and they want to change that? How would they kind of go about possibly addressing that, or possibly wanting to shift from being promiscuous, whether they're a male or they were a female, to having the amount of sex that they desire that's more in line with whatever their value system is?
I think it comes down to really understanding, and for that individual, what sex means to them. Is it validation? Does it mean like, oh, if I have sex with somebody, that means I'm loved automatically? Mm-hmm. And that's not necessarily what sex is, right? It's a physical representation of something else. It could just mean nothing sometimes, and it could mean everything other times. So I'm a little off track. Ask me the question again.
So if someone came into your office and they decided that they had been leading a life that is very sexually promiscuous and they no longer wish or desire to lead such a life, like, what are some of the challenges that come with wanting to make that kind of change? Like, we have a lot of men in culture that are like, it's viewed as like almost like a rite of passage. You should go out and have sex, be promiscuous, have sex with a lot of people, that it's a great thing to do. But then eventually, say you want to settle down and you want to be monogamous, you have kind of practiced non-monogamy and having sex with a lot of people, and you want to make that shift. How would one go about making such a shift?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. I think it starts with that change that you want to make within yourself, and acknowledging and knowing that, because it's going to take a lot of internal work, and realizing the patterns that you have already started from a very young developmental stage, right? Where you're going through puberty and you're learning about your own sexuality. And if you've led that life, it's kind of unlearning stuff and figuring out what are my assumptions about sex? Do I connect it to an emotional thing, or do I not? And if I don't, what's going on there? It's a lot of questioning what you do and how you do it and how you think of it. And that's kind of where I would start with somebody, is start with like their relationship history, or when they first started to learn about sex, how did they do it? And that's something that's really interesting to me, is that too much of a personal question for you? Like, where did you learn about like sex, or like I had conversations with my mom about it. She was pretty open. I didn't know if you would be open to sharing your views.
Yeah. No. I'm
And I think
very.
men and women learn about it like differently too.
Yeah. No, it's something that I'm open to share about. It's actually something that I've been in conversation with other women about, just to learn. I'm originally from Nigeria, so there's a cultural context as well. For me, sex isn't something that was discussed openly, and the messages I was sent about sex at a young age is like, it's something you avoid doing. There are these jokes, there are these memes out there about being Nigerian and growing up. You're not expected to even look at a man, but then you're expected to get married the second you're done with your PhD, right?
Oh,
So
wow.
somehow there's very high expectation for success, but there isn't permission to explore. You're not, there isn't permission to date, there isn't permission to explore until you've achieved a certain level of education. And then there is an expectation almost instantaneously to get married and have children. And I think that one of the things for me that ended up being really challenging about that is not knowing myself led me to make certain choices about prior partners that ultimately weren't in my best interest. But I think you have to go through a period of exploration you can't, it's not like something you can learn in theory, right? It's something you learn in practice and in actuality. So it's something that you have to like have positive and negative experiences to ultimately learn what it is you want or what it is you need. And giving myself in this season of my life the permission to understand what I like and what I don't like has been very welcoming, and I've learned so much about myself. It's funny, I was just chatting with a friend and we were just talking about the kind of like accepting yourself, accepting that it's okay to learn, accepting that it's okay to make mistakes and learning from them. And there's no way to learn but to make mistakes. So yeah. Definitely sent messages of sexuality and sex being a negative thing unless it's within the context of procreation and marriage. And yeah, so it was a very interesting way to grow up. And what about you? What was that like?
That is really interesting. For me, so my mom was a nurse, so she was all about, I was actually talking to her about this today. I have a very young daughter and she's a toddler, so she's starting to figure stuff out, right? I'm like all about referencing the proper name for things. And I'm like, this is your vulva, right? She's like repeating words. And I was telling my mom, I was like, my mom was a nurse growing up and she's like, she taught me all the right words for things. Mm-hmm. And I had a cousin, we were in the bathroom, going to the bathroom, and she's like, I don't know why this came up, but I said, it was your vulva. And she's like, no, it's your vagina. And I'm like, it's not your vagina. It's your, So I'm like feeling dumb because this is my older cousin. I'm like, oh, I want to be like, her, and she's way cooler and all this stuff. And I felt stupid because she's like, you're dumb. Like, that's not what that is. And now later on, years later, I feel like we're having this big shift in talking about sex, about how like, no, these are the right names for things. Your vagina is more internal, da, 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 da. And I'm like, I was right.
Yes, right. You were 100% right. She was wrong. I know. It's funny because one of the things I've done is taken a lot of classes about sexuality and sex, and just learning the right parts, or like using a mirror to just be able to see yourself. I was talking to a friend of mine and he told me that he had a partner once who said that she didn't even know what her vulva looked like, and it's on her own body. So that's like so
scary,
wild to me. And it speaks to one of the videos that are going to come up, because that is like the beginning of understanding who you are. It's so hard to share with a partner who you are, or what you like, or what's pleasurable to you, if you don't even understand who you are. And this, I'm sure as you see, probably causes a lot of challenges for couples in practice. Is that something that you see?
Yeah. And it actually speaks to what you said earlier about you going on this journey for yourself to exploring like what you like and what you need just in general, right? Like the more you know yourself and you get that real life experience within relationships, kind of the better off you are and the more you're able to manage things.
Yeah.
And that's like exactly how I describe therapy to people. I'm like, to me, it's about self-awareness. If I know myself really well, and I'm talking like sexually, emotionally, mentally, all the levels, if I know myself, I'm going to be able to face challenges, stress, cope better. I'm going to be able to handle relationships and know the healthy things for me and not the healthy things. Like, there is a lot of empowerment in knowing yourself.
Yeah. No, absolutely. All the fun is on the other side of knowing yourself.
I know, for sure.
I think this dovetails nicely into the next video, which is a sexuality versus sensuality, I believe.
Mm.
There is a difference also between sexuality and sensuality. Sensuality is the ability to connect deeply to your senses. It's the ability to amplify your senses, usually for the sake of pleasure. Pleasure doesn't have to just be sexual. Pleasure could just be that good feeling that you have all over your body, that relaxation, that sense of calm, that sense of peace, right? And sexuality has a lot to do with sex, like the actual physical act of sex. And by tapping into your sexuality, you tap into your center of creation, your ability to create something. And then, yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that? Let me let you go first this time.
Sure. Yeah, I think she's spot on. She's definitely describing it well to me. I think like sexuality is kind of like our attraction. It's that physical element, yes, but it's like our attraction, our feelings, our behaviors towards sex and our likes and dislikes. I think it has to, but towards others. Mm-hmm. And to me, sensuality is more like internal. It's more like what does things for me, maybe just in general and outside. What do I get pleasure in outside of, yes, sex is included, but outside of sex, it is about our senses. What appeals to me as far as a scent or a touch or something I like or don't like. I think it has just a different external element, sensuality does. And it's something you can feel more of, if that makes sense. It's like something you can wear.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I think like one of the things I like about sensuality is it's something that you can cultivate for yourself, right? I feel like to me, sensuality is the ability to experience all your other senses, whether it's sight, sound, taste, touch, smell, or feel, and your enjoyment of those feelings. And I took a class with Goody Howard, who's a sexologist, and she has a class called Sensual Intelligence. It was wild. I took the class on my way to the UK, so I took it at the airport. And she
what
has
was that like listening to all that?
She has all kinds of props, and like it was just a very interesting experience. But what I did enjoy about the class is it's all about cultivating your sensuality, which can lead to increased sensation of pleasure during sex, but it just allows you to kind of enjoy the experience, and it removes sex from being like an act to like the whole experience, right? The whole pleasure, kind of pleasurable cycle.
Yeah, like if you correlate that to like eating something, taste, right? It's about you're gonna look at a piece of fruit and you're gonna notice its texture, you're gonna touch it, right? And it's about this whole encompassing experience, and then you're gonna taste it, and then it's like you get to experience it on different levels within your senses, which is so cool. So your eye, like I love your description. It's like in a whole experience of all the senses, which I guess sex is as well.
Yeah. And I think it just makes moving it from just sensual, it makes sex more pleasurable the more sensual you are and the more in touch with your senses. One of the things I'm curious about is sensuality seems to connote a more feminine energy versus maybe a more masculine energy to me. I could be wrong about this. I don't know what your perception is of that. And what are ways maybe sensuality maybe can be can be more masculine or experienced in a more masculine way? Would you say that? Or
no, I feel you. Like I think it does have a certain connotation with it, and it does sensual, like sensuality sounds more feminine. I don't know, but like I'm thinking of like, I don't know why this is popping in my head. I don't know if you saw the Super Bowl.
Yes, I
Usher
did.
was the performer, right?
Oh, Usher, but Usher was hypersensual, right? In that sense.
Yes.
I think it's unusual, which is why women love it so much, right? I think it's unusual in a certain way to see a man express that level of desire in that way, right?
Yeah,
So.
I could see that. But he does have an element of sensuality.
Oh,
like
he just oozes. That's just natural for Usher. It's like that.
But I don't think
there was no other reason for me to watch the Super Bowl. What are they doing?
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty amazing. But like, you wouldn't sit there and describe him, oh, he's so sensual. You would, I think it would probably come out as like he exudes some type of sexuality, like sexual prowess or something. It's not, the first word is not sensual. So that is interesting. It does have this feminine type of, but I think male and females can absolutely have those elements, right?
Yeah, and tap into it. But I think, but if we really think about it and put it in terms of the definition we were giving sensuality, that was about sight, that was about sound. Unless you were up close, you were
we have all those.
That was touch, unless you were up close, you were probably, I'm sure he smelled great. But yes, it really was more about the sensuality, and that was so appealing because I spoke to so many different people today, and everyone I spoke to, just even making a doctor's appointment, we're all talking about Usher's halftime show. So definitely hit the sensual note.
Absolutely. So we're going to disprove this whole context of the word. It can have a male masculine element, and the feminine is made of both. So
yeah, exactly. Being able to tap into both. Absolutely.
Right.
So I think we did a good job with that one. Let's go to the next video, which is myths about women's sexuality.
Myth 1, that sex is only for women under insert age here. Women's sexual responsiveness actually increases with age.
Actually, could you pause? Let's do them one at a time. So the first myth was that women's sexual responsiveness peaks at a certain age.
Ugh, yeah. I hate these. These are great. These are great because it's like, are you kidding me? No. I've heard, everybody's probably heard this saying, like, if you don't use it, you lose it kind of thing, right? We can keep our sexual peak as long as, we're doing the things that keep us in that sensual and sexual space. So, I mean, yes, there is a certain age women actually peak around 30, 40, and men are earlier. So, that's kind of more science or research based, but I think it's also based on the individual. What do you think? Was that ever a myth, or did you ever think that?
I've definitely heard the science bit, but I've heard 40. I don't think I've ever heard 30 as the peak until I watched this video. But I think to your point, I've heard the more sex you have, the more sex you have, which I think is is exactly what you're saying, right? So it's kind of like a muscle. The more you engage in sex, the more likely you are to have more sex.
Isn't that the same?
And enjoy the sex, right?
Right, absolutely. And isn't that same for like mental health? Like the more positivity you have, the more positivity is going to be around you. It's all like kind of the same. It's like a boomerang.
Are there any ways you think people could cultivate having more sex in their lives, if that's what?
Absolutely. Yeah. Something I'll tend to ask people is, how often are you masturbating or self-pleasure? And that's sometimes very strongly correlated to how often they're experiencing sex with their partner. A lot of people won't be able to identify like I'll be like, what do you find sexy? And they don't know, and it's like, we've got a lot of exploring to do just on this individual level to tap more into that relationship. And are you feeling connected? That's a large part of it. Are you, that will lead to that physical representation. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. How well do you know yourself? How well do you know what turns you on? How well do you know what turns you off, right? One of the best books that I've read is Come As You Are. I wish I had $1 for each time I've recommended this book to a friend. I would be a millionaire.
Just send them my way next time.
I will. Most definitely will. Monica Landry, that's who you need to talk to. But yeah, I think it's just such a great book with so many tips. Another kind of tip that I have heard is in terms of reading erotica as a way to, one, because of the addictive nature of maybe video versus erotica, as a way of like kind of perking up your imagination to have more sex. So
yeah, absolutely.
Those are definitely something. So let's kind of check out the next video.
Not peaking until 30s. This continues throughout life and only slightly reduces in interest in functioning. Myth number 2 is that normal women have an orgasm every time they have sex. Truth is even the women who orgasms come more easily to, it only happens about 70 to 80% of the time on average. Myth.
Okay. I would say, yeah, I think that this is a very interesting one, because what's normal is what happens for you, right? There isn't really, I find that it's really dangerous to say normal, because then people maybe think that they are abnormal somehow when they are not. And most women don't orgasm from penetrative sex. So that makes it a challenge, I think. It's really about, I think, exploring yourself so that you can know what brings you pleasure, like we said. And then 2, I think being comfortable sharing with your partner what brings you pleasure in a partnered sexual context. Those are kind of like my initial thoughts. I'm not sure what you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've seen a fair share of males in relationships come into therapy and think that they're not pleasing their partners because their partners are not reaching orgasm every single time they have a sexual interaction. And I'm like, it's okay, you know? And if you're talking about it and you're figuring out what each of you like and don't like, then you're in a good space. There doesn't have to be this expectation that each person is going to reach that point every single time there is sex. Like, and it doesn't have to always be penetrative. It could be other forms of sex. And, you know, sometimes it's more fun to just do those and stop.
Yeah.
And
I think that's so true. I think redefining what you consider sex, right? Because it doesn't have to be just one format, I think is so critical, because the more open you are about what it is, then the more pleasure you're actually letting into your life, because whatever you did, that was it, and that you enjoyed yourself and it was cool between both of you, then you're in a good space for sure.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, cool. And the, I guess, next video after this.
3. Pregnancy reduces a woman's sexual responsiveness. Truth is, many women actually report an increase in responsiveness and orgasm after having a child. This is most likely due to the body changes that happen during pregnancy that lead to increased blood flow around the pelvic area. Which of these myths was most surprising to you?
I'm curious what you think.
This one drives me crazy.
I don't have a child, so anything I say will be theoretical. So if you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah. It just varies. Like everything, I think every woman's probably different. For me personally, there was a certain increase at certain points that I was like, we're ready to go, you know, at any point. Yeah, it's a huge fluctuation. And then after there's these lower points where you're like, I thought my sex drive was up here. We've reached a different low because you're just at different points hormonally. You're feeling yourself sometimes, and other times you're not at all. So you just kind of have to really be forgiving with yourself when you're in that stage of life and pregnant and experiencing all those changes. all at once, and you're sleep deprived. I've had couples come to me and be like, we're not having sex. I'm like, you just had a baby. It's okay. You know, like you're not supposed to.
Yeah.
And it's just about communicating. Are we still together? I still love you. I still give that validation, you know? We can connect on a different level. It doesn't always have to be on this sexual part, but that's such a myth. Yeah, like pregnant women. I've heard so many pregnant women are like, I just want to have sex all the time. I'm working out. I want to have sex. I'm doing this, and I have this urge.
Yeah. No, I've definitely heard that as well, right? About the hormones being, especially when they're at their peak, wanting to have sex all the time. But you said something that I found really interesting and wanted to hear a bit more about. Post having the baby, like what are some ways you would suggest, or how do you transition out of being pregnant and, you know, you've had the baby now into getting back into what maybe your new normal sexually, given all the changes that you would have gone through as a woman and now are experiencing, especially if you're in a couple sexually, it's like a different dynamic now for both of you. So what are maybe some ways you can transition into a new kind of sex life or normalcy for you at this point in time?
I feel like a large part, like the first step for me was really just like accepting my body in a different way, that it had created life and it gave birth, and that was pretty freaking magical. But I've never seen my body in that state afterwards. And I think that's kind of hard to process and swallow at first. And you think that of yourself, and then you're wondering, well, what is my partner thinking, or how are they seeing me in this way? And I mean, we're not able to have sex, 6 to 8 weeks afterwards. So we're repairing things. And then after, it's really like you're talking. And personally, we were like super excited to get back into the swing of things and to connect in that way again. It wasn't so much a difficult thing, but I think the harder thing was like after I'm sleep deprived, eating all the time because I'm breastfeeding. I'm super on like crazy different schedule. Like I'm up and down in general. And there were areas and plateaus where like I wasn't, no desire, not wanting to, and it's like, I hate the communication. It's always the C word. It's going to come back to that time and time again. Where are you at? What is your need and want? This is where I'm at. I'm tired. I'm this, I'm that. I love you so much. And I want to do this, but I don't know if I can right now.
Yeah. A therapist once told me it's always a conversation in a relationship. Anything, it's a conversation, right?
Yeah.
But I think just to add a layer on that is society puts so much pressure on women to snap back into who you were beforehand. And you're never going to be that person on some level, right? Emotionally, even if you get back physically looking what you did before the pregnancy, like you said, you've brought life into the world. You're different now, and your family dynamic is different. So it's going to require different coping mechanisms and a lot of self-love and self-compassion and self-acceptance, which are hard without a baby. And I'm sure even that much harder now that you're focused so much energy on this new life that you brought into the world. So,
that's you bring up a huge point, because in human development, that's the most stressful and difficult time. That's a make or break time when you have a newborn, and that's so much stress on the couple when you have children. It's like an insane amount of stress.
Yeah, no, I can't imagine. Okay, so I think let's go on to the last video.
The most important thing about owning your sexuality as a woman is accepting the station you're at, and embracing that. And I say that because I'm down the path of life and I'm smack dab in the middle of menopause, and I am challenging everything I thought I knew about menopause. Like, your life is over. You are disposable. Society no longer has a place for you. You should retire. You should pack it up. I'm challenging all of those stereotypes. You look a certain way. You have to feel a certain way. No, that's not true. I'm my best self now that I reached 56 years old. I have the most to offer. I have zero blanks to give anymore, right? I'm solidly in my womanhood. I'm solidly in who I am and what I have to offer and what I have to say, I finally realized it's valuable. Even if no one else agrees, it's my point of view and I have a right to have it. So, that's what I say. Own wherever you are. That's where I'm at. If you're in your 20s, own that. Own the era of exploration. Earn the era of real curiosity. Earn the era of trying to figure out who you are. Take your time and figure yourself out. You don't have to be rushed. You don't have to be forced. It's not a race. If you're in your mid-30s, don't be bogged down by you have to have children by a certain age. You decide when you want to have children. And by the way, if you want to have children, like the most important.
I mean, that dovetails so nicely into like all we've been talking about today so far. There are just so many gems. I would just say, I love how she says it's not a race. Because I think I can speak for myself. I feel pressure of like, you haven't done this by 25. Oh my God, your life is over. You haven't done that by 30. Like, why are you even alive? There's like so much pressure to have achieved so many things by certain goalposts, and they really aren't. And everyone, like I've taken like, the amount of time I've taken to grow and develop as an individual and to understand myself, and just giving myself that grace has been, and that self-compassion, which I've been talking a lot about lately, and just accepting that I can make mistakes and I can grow and I can learn from them has just been so beautiful. And just being in gratitude for where I am and the things I have accomplished has just made a world of difference. But yeah, let me give you a crack at it.
Well, to speak to that, like when you think about when you were in your 20s, what did you feel like then? Like looking back now, what did you wish you were like?
Wow. No, that's a great question. My 20s were just, I was so sheltered growing up that my 20s were a period where I was very curious about the world, and I felt like I was on a timeline. I definitely felt like,
Even then?
because there, yeah. I was like, I had to, there's a huge pressure in the Nigerian community to have a master's degree, to achieve certain things by a certain timeline, to get married by a certain timeline. And those were definitely the pressures. I would have told myself, oh my gosh, just pause, explore, and enjoy life. Learn to enjoy being 20 and not being responsible. I was so responsible.
Do you think culturally you would have been able to like explore and just do the things you wanted to?
No, I don't think so. And I don't even think I'm built that way, right? I think culturally it would have been hard. I had a lot of unlearning to do, which I'm constantly unlearning now, and have learned to relax more, learn to enjoy myself more, learn to bring in like this podcast and things into my life that I probably wouldn't have in my 20s, wouldn't have given myself the permission to like be vulnerable in this way, because like you're sharing of yourself, right? And you put it out there and it's out there. There's no taking it back, which is what I love about it, and which is also what is scary about it. So it's definitely a chance to express myself in a different way. But I don't think I would have taken the risks I took. I had to make so many mistakes to realize that opening myself up is the right thing to do. Being in alignment with my core values is the right thing to do. And that has led to making career shifts and all kinds of things. So, but I wouldn't take the journey back. I wouldn't, because the mistakes, everything has led me to this moment. And I love my life right now. I'm like, I'm in a place of such peace with who I am, and such happiness and joy with who I am. And I've earned it. I've fought for it in so many different ways, through therapy, through mistakes and everything. So I'm just in such a good place. But
that's awesome.
Thank you. Full
That's
circle,
so beautiful.
Right? Thanks.
Yeah.
What about you?
To go back to the video, I love when she says, earn your era of exploration, earn your era of challenge, or what, wherever you're at, just earn it. I think I definitely earned mine in relationships. I always associated like a failed relationship with like me failing in kind of general or in life. And I've really shifted that a lot. I've had a lot of relationships where I've really worked hard at and changed them. And I really, like you said, like I wouldn't change any. I had so many heartbreaks, like so many ghosts, so many things happen, right? And it's like in the moment I would have changed all of it. And now later in life, I'm like, I wouldn't have changed a thing because then I wouldn't be here. And I wouldn't have learned, like they're not failures anymore. They're all successes because I learned something about myself from each relationship. So yeah, I love what she says about everything and menopause and all the things included. You know, it's the same thing with mental health. You have to just be where you're at, be present and be in it.
I love the fact that she's talking about menopause because I think we look at it like exactly how she said that you have no more sexuality at a certain point, and we're living so much longer, and women are so much more vibrant. And like she looks amazing. Like I even like when she said, I'm like, you look like you're 30. No, like, you know, there must be a mistake here or something. So I'm really excited that she's talking about it, and more women are talking about it and expressing themselves sexually, no matter what age they are. Because when we don't see it, we don't tend to imagine the possibility of it. So that's really
absolutely
good.
And I think that continues to keep women on a timeline. Like we have to go through getting a period, we have to go, that's puberty for us. Men don't have that age, sex, you know. And then when we have pregnancy as a timeline, menopause as a timeline, men don't really, you know. And that's such a difference, and we have to like, this is kind of how we're taught to function. And I love, hopefully we can start to really reframe how we can function as women, as, you know, there's just more things we're always changing. We're always evolving. We're just always on this, yes, a timeline, but there's things that change on a timeline.
Yeah. And I think what I love about technology is that it has reduced the pressure, to your point of timeline, where like having kids has been such a pressure timeline for women historically and even now. But with changes in technology, women have more options to delay having a child, or with things such as surrogacy. It has given you the ability to maybe have a child or have a family in a different way that allows you to focus maybe on discovery and learning other things about yourself. Although my friends who had kids really young, I definitely admire them. There's definitely pros to that, because like I think I have friends who are like, some are in their 40s and their like kids are like almost 20 or
So nuts.
And
like good for them, but like also how challenging must that have been in the moment when they were in their 20s with their kids, like
absolutely. But I think either way is cool. There is no right way to do it. And I think the cool thing about being a parent older is like you have so much more patience. And like I think every parent, you're going to give your kids something in terms of like what you have to offer your child is different in terms of your wisdom of being older, your patience of being a parent at a certain age versus being younger. So but then you can also play with your kids when you're young. So there is no
That's true. That's true. I think it's just about growth. And the older you are, hopefully the more growth you've gained and knowing yourself, you know, and then once you do that, you kind of stop that pattern, and then you don't have to pass it on to your kid.
Hopefully, right? No, absolutely. No, this has been so much fun. Let's I think that was the last video in that segment. So let's go to the group chat and see what questions we have from our group chat. So the first question is, my partner and I have very different levels of sexual desire, and it's causing tension in our relationship. What advice do you have for couples dealing with mismatched libidos?
So I think it's about connection. How do we connect? So some people connect, they have to have this emotional, maybe a conversation or an intellectual exchange, right? And that leads them to this physical space. And some people are the opposite. I have to have this physical representation. We have to have sex for me to feel emotionally connected.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe figuring that out would be a good place to start to see how we can work around this.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I've had couples that have come to me with this, you know, it's kind of talking about what's your idea of like in a week, how often would you like to have sex? Could we substitute that with just some moments of intimacy? If we just lay naked for a few minutes, you know what I mean? Or if we just make out, or it doesn't, like we talked about earlier, it doesn't have to be this, we have to reach this point for this to be sex and for us to be intimate and to match our libidos.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I would just add to that, another thing I learned from Come As You Are is in terms of how, and these are broad stereotypes. I think everybody is individual and different, and there's just a broad way of looking at it. You may experience something different, where women generally tend to be more responsive, while I think men tend to be more spontaneous in terms of their sexual desire. So like it may take a female partner a longer time to reach the point of arousal, and understanding it may not even be like there's a different libido. It may be understanding that you need to initiate sex, depending on how you're defining sex with your partner, from the way in which you're speaking to them, or the scheduling of sex, which can create anticipation towards the event much, much earlier, so that you can have the kind of sex and enjoy the kind of sexual life that you have, versus expecting your partner to be sexual at a drop. And I think another big one for women that I've read or experienced is stress, and the impact of stress on your relationship, right? And she talks about turning on your ons and turning off your offs, the things that reduce your ability to be sexual, to desire sex. And just speaking for myself, I know we like multitask in our minds so much. So we're thinking about the dishes that have to be done can prevent you from desiring sex, because the way our minds are wired, I need to get all those things done before I can relax enough to think of myself in a sexual way or as a sexual being. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the next question we have is, lately my partner and I have been feeling distant and our intimate life has suffered. What are some ways we can reignite the spark and reconnect on a deeper level?
I give this exercise a lot to couples that are maybe feeling disconnected or not so, you know, I don't know, active in that way. And it's just to start with like touch. So to do like this kind of touch exercise where you start at the head, work your way down to the feet, and just play with different levels of touch, whether that's scratching or grabbing or lightly touching or tickling, and just explore each other's skin. You know, it's our biggest organ, and it has all certain zones and areas that their skin is thinner where it feels more intense. Some places people don't like to be tickled, and this is always changing, right? So as a way to connect as we age, right, or after we've gone through different periods of life, whether that's pregnancy or menopause or what have you, or it's that time of the month, we're more sensitive than others. So it's kind of, your partner does that to you, and what you communicate constantly, what you like, what you don't like, and you work your way down to the feet, and then you return that favor to your partner. Of course, there's always stuff like, you know, a massage, just a reconnecting, that communication, a date, doing something special, recreating that first date, you know, just going out of your way, doing your partner's, you know, love language. There's so many things that can come into that. And another big one is ritual. How do you greet your partner when you come home from a day? Do you come and say, oh, hey, and then go about, you know, I'm going to get some water, I'm going to get food, da, 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 da. Is it a kiss? I've missed you. Is it a hug? How do you reconnect after you've been separated? You know, you start small in those small acts. Like you were saying earlier, it starts early. Sex starts way earlier than in that moment when you're actually together. It's how you're talking to each other, how you're respecting each other, what you're considering. Are you following up? Hey, you mentioned this. Let's talk about it. Oh, they heard me. I feel heard and acknowledged and cared for.
Yeah, I love that. I love all the things you said. especially the part of the touch. And I love the fact that it changes over time. So the exercise can never get old, right? So, cause like you're learning something new at each point about your partner. So it's always a new conversation, a new thing to enjoy. So I love that, especially. The next question we have is, I'm curious to try new things in bed, but a bit hesitant. Do you have any advice on how my partner and I can start exploring comfortably?
But the first thought that pops in my head is to watch porn together. Some people aren't open to that, which I get. And there's a whole thing with porn and what's really out there, because there's different types and can be very stereotypical and harmful towards women type of thing. But I think just talking about like and knowing what you like is a start, right? And if you're how to breach that conversation, it's bringing it up, learning like, hey, like, what do you have certain fantasies? Do you have things that you really want that maybe we're not doing in bed? It's like I tend to give couples like a relationship check-in. So like every week or at least once a month, what are we doing that's working? And this could just be about sex. What are we doing that's working? What are we doing that's not? What are we doing that we can improve on? Is there something that we haven't tried that you want to try? Because that's always changing. Our wants and desires change. Oh, I haven't tried this. This sounds fun. I saw this on a show or whatever, or it's piqued my interest. Like, do a check-in and see a sexual check-in.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Well, first, the thing about porn, or I would say, is like there are also maybe religious reasons for some people not wanting to engage in it, which are perfectly valid and perfectly legitimate. But I love the debrief idea that you kind of mentioned, where you're talking about what do I like, what do I not like, and that's like a constant conversation, right? Of what's working, what's not working. I think that's a very effective way to kind of try new things or create a culture in your relationship where the trying of new things is not even an issue to begin with. So that's great. And our final question from the group chat is, I really want to understand what my partner likes in bed. We kind of alluded to this a little bit, but I'm not sure how to bring it up. Can you share some tips on how we can communicate our desires more openly?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of like checked on different points. You could do a check-in with that as well. But maybe like even when you're just in the act of it, right? Do you like this? Kind of checking in with them. Does this feel good? What does this feel like? You could try that. That's an option. I think that's great. We've talked about a whole bunch of different ways that people can connect with their partner. So it makes a lot of sense, and check in right there in the middle of things. So definitely. Absolutely.
This has been so much fun. Like I was like curious within myself, how would this go? Right. Because it's a taboo subject still on some level to have this kind of a conversation. So I'm so glad we did this and talked about this. So thanks again for joining us here today. Do you have anything that you're working on right now that you'd like to share with the audience? What are some ways in which we can kind of support what you have going on?
Yeah, I know. I really appreciate this time and space with you as well. I really, really enjoyed it. And so thank you for offering this. I am creating and cultivating and building social media around intimate intellect. That's kind of a name I've recently landed on. So hopefully people can just look out for that. I'm going to start to really build some content around that name and hopefully just open up conversations about sex and relationships and all the levels to it more and make it less taboo.
Yeah, no, I love that. We'll definitely look out for that. And we'll link all your socials so people know where to find you online as well. But This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much. And we'll have to do it again for sure.
Definitely. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks for tuning in to the No Ordinary Love podcast. I'm your host, Roslyn Ona, reminding you that extraordinary love is out there. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star review. Until next time, embrace your own unique love story.